Yeah, I'm going to talk from the point of view of curatorial experience and conceptualization on the basis of those two exhibitions that Maria mentioned at the beginning that I was involved in curating, Populism and Fundamentalisms of the New Order. And some of you might have seen Populism at the State Elite Museum this summer, so I'm going to be very brief about that and mostly focus on the Fundamentalism exhibition. So just to start with Populism, which apart from at the State Elite took place in Vilnius and Oslo and Frankfurt at the same time. And the way that the exhibition in this way reproduced itself as site was intended to be a reflection of the way that populist movements use media to disseminate themselves. So in this way we decided to team up with the art institution in order to use the gallery space as a mass medium in a critical investigation of populism. Content-wise, the idea was to use populism as a resource in different ways. According to the political philosopher Chantal Mouffe has asked, does right-wing populism really have the monopoly today on political passion? Can it be taken over? Can it be mobilized for the left wing, basically? Also, what are the populist aspects of art production itself? Notions of interactivity, for example, or the old avant-garde idea that everybody is an artist, etc. We also wanted to investigate what the conditions are today for art production in a broader sense, when the art institution is forced to compete within the populism of the marketplace. And I think Maria was right in saying that populism dealt with war, as did the fundamentalism exhibition. But war was rather a subtext for these exhibitions than an explicit topic. So to go to the Fundamentalisms exhibition, Fundamentalisms of the New Order it was called. I co-curated it together with Charlotte Brandt and Christina Recupero, and it took place in Copenhagen in 2002 at a place called Charlottenborg Exhibition Hall. And Fundamentalisms of the New Order was a kind of forerunner of populism, but it was more focused on one political and cultural context, namely Denmark. The New Order in the title, of course, referred to the New World Order that George Bush Sr. had declared a reality after the American victory in the First Gulf War in 1991. According to Bush, history had ended with the fall of the Iron Curtain, and societal organization had found its transcendental form in liberal democracy and in the global market. But then history had the cheek to start right up again on September 11, 2001, as a threat to this equilibrium that Bush perceived. And it was important for us as curators to be very explicit about wanting to have a discussion about fundamentalism that went further back in recent history than 9/11, because although 9/11 brought the notion of fundamentalism to prominence, it would have been misleading to have a critical discussion about globalization that used that event as its primary framing device. To put it simply, some people say that 9/11 has changed everything. Well, tragically enough, there are many 9/11s. They're taking place all the time. Now, fundamentalism is an ominous and hard word that speaks of something that is apparently far removed from the routines of our everyday life. Yet it has, in recent years, had a pervasive influence on our understanding of global conflict as well as on local events. Our ambition as curators with the exhibition was to activate the notion of fundamentalism in relation to the we in the Western democracies rather than against the them. In other words, to invert fundamentalism as a term of enemy identification. and instead use it to investigate how it constitutes our own place, our own reality. So fundamentalism was defined as ideological phenomena and not necessarily as fanaticism. So it was defined in the context of the exhibition mainly in relation to the theologization of politics and in relation to the naming of economics as a modern name for necessity. That economic efficiency overshadows any political goals. And looking back on the exhibition, I would say that one issue in particular was part of the exhibition's critical context, that of the value struggle, which is a particular Danish phenomenon, a struggle for cultural hegemony. In Denmark, the talk about value struggle started around the time when the present right-wing government came into power, around 2002, and this discussion is still going on. The Danish Prime Minister, Fogh Rasmussen, said then that the outcome of the value struggle will define the future of Denmark, not financial policies, not legislation. And this is coming from a politician who doesn't spend a lot of time in art galleries or reading poetry, but rather focuses on transfiguring the citizen as a consumer, as somebody who possesses exchange values, wages, money, before anything else. So this idea of the value struggle, this project of the value struggle, is closely connected to the third way project of merging state and economy, as Bender also talked about. So I'm sure it's also, in that sense, a well-known phenomenon here in the Netherlands. The interesting thing is perhaps the way it's become an explicit project for the Danish right-wing or the Danish government. You could say that the value struggle denotes a new authoritarian movement in the loose sense of that term. It is the exaltation of family, marketplace, nation, and Christianity. And in that sense, the value struggle is a sort of Scandinavian equivalent, perhaps, to the American cultural struggle between political liberalism and fundamentalist Protestantism. In relation to art, the value struggle implies the assertion of a private sensibility, which the artist is expected to offer. A unique private sensibility which in a proper way is universalized so as to ensure feelings of harmony. In this way, the state does not have to defend the citizen in his or her true individuality, but can focus on the defense of private property. So I'm going to leave the fundamentalist exhibition for a bit and make a jump in history to get a different angle to the discussion. So I'd like to quote the example of a German novelist called Gerd Ledig, who died in the late 1990s, and he wrote 3 books in the 1950s, in the mid-1950s. 2 novels, Die Stalin-Orgel and one called Vergeltung, and a play called Faustrecht. And the novels are translated at least to Stalin Organ and Payback, I think it's called in English. He wrote about the Second World War, loosely based on his own experiences as a German soldier in the Wehrmacht. And he wrote about war as a kind of horror spectacle, and some passages in his books are very graphic and absolutely appalling. Besides, or beyond that, the novels are interesting because they narrate war through topography rather than through characters. For example, the Stalin Organ takes place on both sides of the front line running between the Nazi German and Russian troops on the Eastern Front. And in the end, the front line itself is deconstructed as a demarcation that could possibly yield any meaning. In that respect, Ledig's novels bear resemblance to the projects of the French new novel of the 1950s, with its claim to objectivity and its sensibility to space. Anyway, my example comes from the Stalin Organ, which, as I mentioned, takes place at the Eastern Front. And the last chapter of the book deals with the trial of a German soldier who is being accused of having deserted. The officers of his division hold an improvised war trial against him, and they acquit him, they let him go in the end. However, at the headquarters far away, the high command has already registered the soldier as being guilty of desertion. And more than that, they have also already registered him as being executed for the crime. So now the officers who let the soldier go face the problem of not only having acquitted a man that according to papers is guilty, they've also let a dead man live. And in the end, the soldier is killed anyway because the bureaucracy, for whatever reason, came to the conclusion that he should die. Now, I have two reasons for quoting this episode in the book. One is regards the role of law today, or the role of law in war, and the other one concerns the role of art and artists. So to start with the notion of law, from Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, we know the term war machine, which stands for a constant of sorts. There's always a war machine grinding away across the terrain of history, whether in the form of a Roman chariot or an American fighter plane. Gerd Ledig made the same point by emphasizing that war is a machine that only obeys its own logic and is completely indifferent to human life. And as such, war is beyond the law. Of course, that is also the analysis of the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben in his recent writings, when he talks about the state of exception. Agamben claims that over and beyond democracy there is military law, the state of exception, in which the military is authorized to suspend civil law. In the state of exception, human life is naked life, inasmuch as it is not protected by the rights citizenship normally give to the citizen. In martial law, human life can be taken at will. That's the radical conclusion of martial law. And for Agamben, the archetypal form of naked life is the concentration camp prisoner, who is totally stripped of protection from the law. And then Agamben radicalizes this and claims that the state of exception is becoming a paradigm for the way today's societies are organized. Exemplified in the way that advanced democracies in the West treat illegal combatants, as the term goes, in places like Guantanamo Bay or at the Abu Ghraib prison in Baghdad, but also in relation to the declassification of the citizenship of immigrants and asylum seekers. As Agamben says, the one who's outside the law is not free. On the contrary, the one who's outside the law has the entire weight of the law resting on him or her. So that relates to discussions about the securitization and juridification of our societies today, which feeds into the notion of war and the practice of war in the globalized society. So, secondly, concerning the role of art and the artist, when Gerd Ledig wrote his books in the 1950s, it was clearly as an anti-war statement against World War II as the conflagration that shook the whole edifice of civilization. You could say that Ledig unleashed the destructive powers of war on the pages of his books in order to combat war. He fought fire with fire, so to speak, through the violence of his writing. Today, the face and the structure and dynamics of war is different. Wars have become sporadic and periodic and constant, and take place like police operations, often by armies which to some degree are privatized. So when we say war today, some sliding of the signifier must be taken into account, because war no longer denotes an external enemy threatening the values of civilization. Instead, war is a way of making things work, a way of making money, a way of getting oil, a way of creating jobs, etc., etc. And this is a paradox that both art has to deal with, but also we as citizens have to deal with. Sorry. So you could say that when you try to analyze late capitalism or bureaucratic capitalism, or globalized world, you're faced with irrationality. You can't create a coherent analysis of this because this world order is not rational at all. So what do we do? How can we resist this? I would say that an exhibition like Fundamentalisms of the New Order or Populism proceeded with a two-tiered strategy for critical, artistic, or curatorial practice. And one was the first step was to make an analysis of everyday life that tried to be informed and objective about social space and the pressures on social space. And secondly, to find out where the properties of art can meet the conclusions of this analysis, to find out where the attempted objectivity and rationality of this analysis can meet art on art's premises. Through such a process of translation, we can perhaps start using art's irrationality or art's capacity for bringing ambivalence into play, art's capacity for creating images, perceptions, etc., etc. I believe that's the best way to counteract determinism and instrumentalization in our work. So, to give you an example from the Fundamentalism exhibition about this process of translation from analysis to artistic production. In the exhibition, we introduced the notion of play against fundamentalism. And of course, it may sound like uneven odds to counteract fundamentalism with play, but that was our proposal at the time to translate our analysis of a fundamentalist reality to the realm of art. The idea was that in play, the experimental dimension is inevitable. Also, a game needs real players with a passionate attraction to ideas and forms, to the rules of the game and the ways in which these might be broken. In our catalog text, we quoted an example from the middle of the war, namely the case of Brian Keenan, a Northern Irish college teacher who was held hostage for 4.5 years during the Lebanese Civil War. In a book that he wrote about his ordeal, he describes how he and his fellow prisoners would take what few materials they had and construct games to pass their time. He states that, quote, "The playing of games is anathema to the fundamentalist mind, which believes it should have no preoccupation but God. Our God, we quietly acknowledged, existed in each other, and it was to please each other and ourselves that we played our games," unquote. In other words, this kind of playing or experimentation to please each other and ourselves is a way of maintaining an awareness that a production of ideas and values is taking place. So, by way of a conclusion, you might argue that the political efficiency of art lies in the fact that it allows us to work through notions of the political as something that is unfinished. Not many other spheres of knowledge allow in the same way for the interplay of relations and the readiness to bear the conflict of different perceptions, practices, and concepts. On another level, this is also what is required to reinstall some of the in-between levels that are getting eradicated in the politics of other weathers or against us. I would like to show a video, an animation film that we showed in the Fundamentalisms exhibition. It's an animation by an Israeli artist called Gili Dolev, and it's called Promised Land. And it's a sort of South Park style depiction of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And apart from the fact that it's a very interesting piece, I also show it for the reason that it was discussed by one of the critics of a critic who reviewed the exhibition, Jan Verwoerd, who I believe was here as well in one of the talks. And Verwoerd, his conclusion about the exhibition was that, well, that the bottom line for him was that it was too feel-good. This idea about play was too predominant. The exhibition became a liberal discussion forum. But with this piece, he said, with Promised Land by Gilles Deleuze, here was an anti-fundamentalist work, because, as he wrote, here's an artwork that barks back with its teeth bared in the face of fundamentalism. And he also liked what he called the joyously obscene sarcasm of the piece. So, it's 15 minutes long.
Hello, you're watching World in Crisis, and I'm Barbara Parker. Join me live. Hi there.
Hello! Disgusting, huh? Sweet revenge! You see that guy over there? 10 minutes ago, I'm cleaning this guy's mess. Oops! I accidentally spilled some mess over him. You stinking Arab! Now, you see that couple over there? They're going to get this!
Why them then?
Because they're Jews! Just like the other guy. Buon appetito.
That's pretty severe, don't you think?
Don't worry, don't kill me.
And you are...
Oh, sorry. Omar. Maybe not. You see, it's my 20th birthday today.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear.
Yes, thank you. Shut up! Thanks. You see, I'm an Israeli Arab. And to be one is like being the son of a merciful mother and an abusive father who beats the crap out of you. No more a helpless Israeli Arab. From now on, I'm a Palestinian.
Excuse me, what's happening here?
Pretty horrible, huh? Revenge! You see that burnt bus over there? 10 minutes ago, boom! Big fucking suicide bomber. Hamas probably went on a bus full of women and children, from head to toe, armed with explosives, and blew himself up. Here, in the middle of Tel Aviv.
Why this guy then?
Well, he's an Arab, just like the other one.
And you are?
Ooh, sorry. I'm Ethan. Maybe not.
Don't you think he had enough?
Don't worry. Kill him. See, I'm 20 today.
Happy birthday, Ethan. So how do you see the current situation?
It's crap. We Jews can't even feel safe in our own country without some Palestinian bastards trying to blow us up.
We got an extraordinary opportunity here to see a suicide bomber in action.
My name is Ahmad, and I'm on a holy mission to become a Shaheed. Shaheed is a person that's the heaven inshallah, killed by the Jews as a soldier of Allah.
Primed for action, Ahmed heads for his target and martyrdom.
Bombs on my body, Tel Aviv by now. If you're many Jews, I hope I want it dead. Allah Akbar!
69 duties, but if you want Chinese, waiting here in heaven to kiss them and to breathe. Shaheed, 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 Shaheed.
Quickly, follow me. It's not safe to be here.
The Jewish settler. Let's see what he's up to.
Oh, pardon. Maybe not. I live right over there, in the Jewish settlement. Hi. By the way, I'm 20 today.
Happy birthday.
Mazel tov!
Thank you. Please, come in.
That's their synagogue.
They're praying. Have to go join them.
We've longed for this place for 2,000 years. We daily ask God to open his ears. So now when he listens, we often use his name to claim an extra piece of land. Obviously in vain.
True, it's not easy to raise our young in such a hostile place. But wherever you go,
There's roots on control.
to protect us when we misbehave.
These are live pictures from the Casbah of Heaven.
True, there's no dearer price than our young soldiers know. We're the ones who truly suffer. But Israel must pay, so we can stay and pray.
Oh, we will journey to blood and in fire.
And in blood and in fire, and in blood and in fire.
I'm here, Barbara Parker, reporting to you from the middle of a Palestinian demonstration. I'm going to speak to one of the rioters. And who are you?
I'm Ali. Well, really not.
For the past few decades, the Palestinians have provided cheap labor for the Israeli economy, mainly as construction workers.
No more a nation of slaves who take any job and live on leftovers.
No more a nation of slaves.
Whose freedom depends on someone else's goodwill.
Our frustration's sake.
No more!
Our hunger, priest, to fight.
Intifada prayers
We shouted.
will gain us back our pride.
No more a nation of slaves.
Why don't they do something about it?
They didn't want us to work for them.
A modern nation of slaves.
Israel is the life support machine of the Palestinian economy.
If we cut the umbilical cord, donating us in Mother Israel.
We'll all die.
Fucking rubber bullets! The Israeli present for my 20th birthday!
Happy birthday.
Rubber bullet extensions. Not lethal if you aim the lower part of the body. But some guys, you know. Oh, by the way, I'm Gaddy.
Yes, yes. I've heard that a kid was killed here yesterday.
Yeah. We came to throw stones and was caught in a crossfire between us and the Palestinians.
How do you feel about it?
Tell him. But I blame the parents who send their children to the front line. I'm sick of this place. What do I care? I'm 20 today, and tomorrow I'm off home celebrating.
I'm here at the Dome of the Rock, where a huge crowd has gathered. This is a most sacred place for both Muslims and Jews, and you are watching live.
We've prayed for this moment for such a long time. The moment when peace will finally come. I can see it coming, pure and divine, clear as reflection of calm water. But
anyway?
Maybe we don't like to fight.
But we're really good at
Cheers! Cheers!
This has been Barbara Parker, Dome of the Rock, Jerusalem. The delicate scent of the Pulitzer Prize.
Next on NCC, World Cup Finals in Mud Wrestling. Live from Kabul and Mazar-e
Those media guys always show stereotypes. They never show real people like us. Now, where was I?
666. Come on. 666. Go, baby, go.
2 and 1. How low can you go? We're what we call a silent majority.
The bargain news. Probably not extreme enough for them.
But don't get us wrong. We don't believe in peace.
Hi, God, no. We want to wake up one morning and find that you are all gone.
And we want to chuck you all into the sea.
But we've agreed to make ceasefire.
To cease fire.
Ceasefire.
Cheers. Oh, 666. I've won. Look, how? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Now, wait a second. You can't do that.
Of course I can.
You don't understand the rules.
Of course I understand the rule. Look, it's in the book.
It's not in the book.
Read the book.
I read the book many times.
I wrote the book.
Oh, yeah, but you still can't do that.
Yes, I can.
You can't do that.
But I can.
No, you can't.
Look, every day it's the same with you. You with the rules.
And you with your book.
You always come up with new rules.
It's only new to you. Ask anyone.
I have.
And
They've never heard it.
because you asked the wrong people.
They can't be wrong. They're my people.
They are mine, therefore you're wrong and you can't win.
I won, but you won't let me win.
No, I'm not stopping you winning. I'm just saying you can't do that.
Yes, I can.
No, you can't.
I can. Can
You can't.
I think it's ready.
I think you're right.
Finally, you agree on something.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lars. I suggest that we take some 15 minutes for drinks upstairs before we continue with 2 more presentations and a discussion. Thanks so far.